welcome to Jeremy. Hello, good morning. Jeremy is an Associate Professor of Practice and the Founding Director of Executive Mind Leadership Institute in the Peter F. Drucker Graduate School of Management. Jeremy has more than decades experience helping leaders to develop themselves with retaining their humanity in face of change and challenge. And it's worth mentioning that he's a great grandson of a sumo wrestler. Did he teach you any tricks?
Yeah, that's him.
Jeremy created and teaches the Executive Mind, a series of demanding and transformative executive education courses dedicated to Drucker's as a assertion that you cannot manage other people unless you manage yourself first. And which is going to be some of the topics you're going to tell us about?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
We'll see. Thank you. Well, good morning. Just to get things out of the way, how many people saw the talk last time in 2016? 3, 4, 5, 6? Okay, good. So about 3/4 of you didn't ask anything about me, but asked about my son, who was there last time. So just to allay your curiosity, that's him, and this is him now, and this is him at the store, and this is him practicing his force on his father. So just to catch you up on the Hunter family, all right? So he's doing well. He's now flying a plane. But so, as was mentioned, my work is based on Peter Drucker, who I think you know is the founding father of the discipline of management. And he had this idea, quite radical, that you can't manage other people unless you manage yourself first. When I first started teaching in 2003, some of my colleagues said, well, we teach finance, but we don't teach personal finance. We teach management, but why would we ever teach you to manage yourself? And they were serious. And they're all dead now. But it was, Michael and I were talking last night that how much the world has changed in 20 years. My first class was in 2003, and now it's 2019. And to walk into a room where somebody hasn't ever heard of mindfulness is now almost unheard of, right? So what you're doing here, I think, is such a wonderful thing. What I do in now 20 years of teaching almost, is developed a suite of classes that are all about helping you manage yourself. And in the executive management program, we have 7 weeks on a class called The Power of Attention. And this is all 7 weeks on learning how to manage your nervous system and manage your attention. Right? Attention being the most important, I would say, asset that you have, how you use your attention. That's why everyone is trying to get it from you. And yesterday, we were talking about what will the role of AI be or what will the role of humans be in an era of potentially mass unemployment, and 20 to 30%, somebody said. And so one of my assertions is that attention needs somewhere good to go. Attention needs somewhere good to go. How you invest your attention from moment to moment is what makes up your life. And if you don't have conscious tools for deliberately being able to invest your attention in something that's growth-oriented or positive or something that will nourish you in some way, then generally you don't go in a good direction.
Okay, move it down a little. I think the battery probably. Yeah.
My battery or the... So, attention needs somewhere good to go. And how you control your attention in a world that is trying to distract you at every turn is now, I think, an essential skill for being alive today. Just as in the 20th century, learning how to read, write, and do arithmetic was an essential skill to be an effective member of society. So we do 7 weeks on that. Then we do another 7 weeks on mastering emotional reactions. And the key point here is that emotions are information and energy that need to be experienced and integrated, not something that's pushed away. One of my students said, "Oh, I realized emotions aren't problems to be solved." Let's see, how's that?
On the way around.
I never get these things. Thank you. Oh yeah, this feels much better. All right. Doesn't work
Sound
good.
good.
Okay, it's all right. So emotions aren't problems to be solved. And yet we often, when we're not feeling good, we tend to think that there's a problem. And we don't have the skill to learn how to know how to metabolize that. So, and then the other thing, which somebody mentioned yesterday, the phrase the soft skills, which absolutely drives me nuts. Right? There's the hard skills and then the soft skills. And they're usually quietly derided, the soft skills are derided by usually the people who don't have them. And I think, you know, what is soft about learning how to either manage your own emotions or manage someone else? There's nothing soft about it. Oh, that's totally different. Thank you. Good. Anyway, all the stuff I said was really important. That's okay. So I think of them as the hard skills and the harder skills, right? Because what's more unpredictable than other human beings? So then we do another 7 weeks on how do you manage change and transition, which of course is I think the theme of the next 150 years of our civilization. Then this is a new class I developed with a colleague called Finding Clarity in Critical Career Issues. This is now a required class. None of my other classes are required, but now at the Drucker School, you don't leave the Drucker School without having at least a functional understanding of how mindfulness works. We study primarily through third person in this class. So we look at some other mindless person, not you. Ethically, I didn't believe that it was right to force somebody to take a mindfulness class. But if you could study someone else's mindlessness and how it works, then something usually sinks in. And then the final class on creating change and how do you do that as a leader. And then in the MBA program, we have a class called the Practice of Self-Management. What all of this is meant to do is to show people that at some level they're co-creating their own reality. Right? And to watch that in a systematic step-by-step way. We hear the phrase agile learners, right? And I think that's what these kind of things do. When you learn how to manage your perception, you manage your attention, you manage your emotional reactions, you manage your non-conscious beliefs and biases, you're able to make them more conscious and then, choosable at some level. So this is building on the traditional Western platform of I think, therefore I am. But no one wants to throw out thinking. But if we equate only thinking with being, which we've done for 400 years, you get a lot of problems. So how do we let the rest of your humanity into the classroom? That's really kind of what I try to do in my own work. So today's agenda, maybe in the next 35 minutes, we'll explore these questions. Mindfulness for what? Right? Why practice mindfulness? Right? It's not in and of itself necessarily obvious why we do it, but for what reason? And for me, I have a very specific reason for doing that. What gets in the way? Well, we rarely talk about mindlessness. Although I thought the football video yesterday was absolutely brilliant, right? And I found that if you're in a position in an organization of having to convince somebody to take on mindfulness and they're resistant, my suggestion is not to start with mindfulness, but to start with mindlessness. Talk about mindlessness in your organization and your life because everybody will know what that is. Oh, okay, I see. Whereas not everybody will know what mindfulness is. Another crazy thing from California. What else gets in the way? I don't know if we'll be able to talk about this, but survival reactivity. Right? And what's getting in the way is of you making conscious, deliberate choices. in concert with other people. And then how do you practice mindfulness in action? Like I'll say that my courses don't teach you how to meditate right away. We leave that for later. And that the orientation is to be able to see yourself in action, to use what I call the craziness of your life as the place of practicing. And partly that was due because when I first started in 2003, nobody was interested in meditating, but they were all interested in solving their problems. And so what I tried to do was construct a method where they could learn mindfulness by dealing with the problems of their life. So, and then once they can start to see, oh, my problems will go away, or that these situations will change if I learn how to use my mind differently, then they get interested in meditating. Right? So anyway, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So mindfulness for what? Here's one of the fundamental kind of assumptions I walk around with, is that in traditional management education, we focus primarily on the outer game. Right? Like, how do you manage other people? How do you manage strategies? How do you manage marketing campaigns? How do you manage money? All of that sort of stuff. And that this is largely ignored. Right? And then in other contexts, they'll tell you, oh, go meditate, but it isn't connected to anything outside in the world. Like my cousin, who goes to a temple every month outside of Tokyo. He's a very diligent meditator, but then when I go over and visit him, he's always yelling at his kids, right? So, and I think, how are these two things connected, right? Like, how is your off-the-cushion life resembling your on-the-cushion life? And how do you bring them closer together, right? So, how I think about it is that how simultaneously can you read the outer game and then also manage what's going on inside you, right? So that you can be effective. Parenting, as you probably all know, is the ultimate training for this, right? Does this make sense so far? Yeah. So, this is a satellite image of the hurricane or the typhoon that hit Tokyo last week. And this phrase, your past experience will not help you in this circumstance, was repeated over and over and over and over and over again. And as I'm watching this, I said, oh wow, this is all about mindlessness. Right? Your past experience will not help you in this circumstance. The typhoon was so intense that 6 million people were given evacuation orders. What's the population of Norway?
6 million.
Right? So imagine this entire country has to move somewhere else. Right? It's unprecedented. It's not the worst typhoon to hit Japan, but it's one of the most intense in a while. 6 million people were given evacuation orders, and there were $9 billion of damages in 2 days. Entire fleets of bullet trains have been destroyed by the water. They have to recreate them. So I tend to think that this is a warning bell, right? And I don't know how much this is a reality for you here, but for Japan, this is the climate change wake-up call. They came within 1 meter of having the entire western suburbs of Tokyo underwater. So, which is something that the city is not prepared for. So I tend to think that mindfulness for what, right? That we've entered, and I'm sure you've all read his books, but that we've entered the age of adaptation, right? Our prior experience will not help us in this circumstance. Whether it's technology, whether it's politics, whether it's the weather, that we're entering into a period where mindlessness will not help us. So, thus, I think it's important to talk about mindlessness before mindfulness, and mindfulness for what? And for me, it's mindfulness to be able to learn, adapt, and grow. And how do you do it quickly, right? How do you do it in a way that helps you shift the results you get? And that you can use the craziness of your daily life as a way to practice. My son, who every night since he has been born has had to brush his teeth, and every night since he's been born, he doesn't want to brush his teeth. And that's my practice, right? Because, Like, come on, we've done this before, you know you have to do it, all this sort of stuff. And then how do I manage my mind in this circumstance? And I'm tired, right? He'd rather play with his dinosaur toys. And so, how do I step out of that? This actually really happened last week, and then I said, well, do you think the dinosaurs want to brush their teeth? And he said, yeah, that's a great idea. And I said, well, how about you brush your teeth first, and then we can brush the dinosaur's teeth? And it worked like a charm, right? But I realized that had I gotten angry and forced him, it wouldn't have done anything. You know, it would have been awful. And it would have damaged our relationship. So learning how to recognize, like, what's going on inside you right now. What's going on inside you right now? Let go of that. Figure out what do you really want, and then step in that direction. This is how I work. Right? So you're using moments in your daily life to check in to see, okay, what's going on inside me? Because if you don't do that, then the angry dad will take over, or you'll default to the way you've always done it, and that maybe your past experience will not help you in this circumstance. Right? One question we ask people we work with at the Drucker School is, what do you do that consistently produces an unwanted result? Right? I want to please keep that in mind. And that, not to sound negative, but by focusing on your menu of unwanted results, oftentimes catalyzes you to shift into a different, higher level of operation. Because there's something about your existing tool set that doesn't meet the complexity of the existing situation. And by focusing on the unwanted result, you're starting to see where are the holes in how you operate. I have a fascinating story from one of my students about this. So mindfulness for what? Is mindfulness to create new options and choices. Because at this point, we will really need to know how to do this well. So let's face the reality of mindlessness. This is a recreation of a photograph my wife frequently sends me of my keys hanging out the front door with the caption, "Mr. Mindfulness strikes again." But Drucker also had this insight that perception was more important than analysis, right? That your capacity to see things clearly in a changing world was more important than your ability to think about it. And then you have, almost the flip side conversation with Ellen Langer at Harvard, that virtually all the world's ills boil down to mindlessness, right? And so, let's have a little fun. I'm going to show you an image, and I'd like you to just take a look at it and notice what details you see, okay? Perception is more important than analysis. How many fingers?
Six.
Any others?
6.
That's interesting. In the US, oftentimes people will say 5. Okay. In Japan, they'll say 6 because this is considered a finger. Right? So it's a difference in reality construction, first of all, one. But okay, all right. So we can make an argument, right? There's 6 somethings sticking out of there. Buying gloves must be a challenge. All right, here's another one. Maybe you've seen this. Okay, so on a piece of paper, what's one word you associate with what you just saw? And just write it down, and then compare it with the person next to you. Just one word, not an essay. All right, so let's hear some words. Say it again. Blot. Okay. Anybody else have blot or spot or something like that? All right. Skull. Anybody have skull? All right. Ocean. Anybody? All right. Cow. Anybody else have cow? All right. Map. Okay. Anything else that hasn't been said yet? Map seems to be the winner. All right. A woman. All right. Anybody else have a woman? No? All right. Anything else?
Colorless.
Say it. Colorless. Colorless. Okay. Somebody said cow. Interestingly. One thing no one said skull, but one thing I'm curious about is how many people's attention went here? Right? Anybody else? Like right in this lower left-hand corner. Anybody notice their attention go there first? Yes. Yeah? Okay. Phew. So, one is that past experience informs present experience. The pattern of the fingers creates a template for your perception to look at. And I found that about a third of people will go here. Right? But what's interesting is nobody sees the cow. In fact, I did this with a group of 300 people at Hitachi earlier this year, and only out of 300, only 3 or 4 people saw a cow. Right? Anybody not see a cow? So if I had shown you this first, right, and just notice the details, notice the ears specifically, I would say. Like, pay attention to the shape of the ears, and then see if you notice anything differently. Right, so the existing frames we walk around the world with influence your perception. Anybody still not see the cow? Okay, you don't know. Let's see. That would be too embarrassing for you to raise your hand to say I'm the one who doesn't see the cow. All right.
I did see the cow, but there was a break in between when you showed the cow picture. When we went back to this, I still didn't see the cow, and then it came back.
And then it came back. Interesting. So, there are several reasons for showing you this. One is to show you that the malleability of your own perception. Right? It's not that there's a clock that says 9:23 there and that everybody perceives it the same way. Right? The perception is malleable, and that your past experience will influence how you're perceiving reality, and even when your past experience is something really trivial. Now add into that emotional trauma or financial hardship or a broken heart or whatnot, and that will really influence your perception. Right? So that's something we never teach you in school, right? That you are co-constructing your own experience. And so mindlessness is something I think we need to spend a little bit more time talking about. Drucker had the insight. Somebody asked him, what's the most important thing for executives to learn? He says, oh, that's easy. They have to learn to unlearn. Right? So how do we learn to unlearn? Because we walk around with these fixed ideas about how the way the world is. And to move them, right? And so not only are they non-consciously operating, but they're operating very quickly on autopilot. And so we walk around with these old maps of the world. Your map is inherently outdated. This is a 1634 Spanish map showing of North America, showing California as an island, which some of you may argue it still is. But right, what happens when I have an old car, and so the online map is outdated, and so we're often on driving on roads that don't exist in the car's map, and I'm wondering what the car thinks is going on. But right, we walk around with old maps, and so how do we learn how to let go of the map? Right. So is this a planet floating in space, or is it just a hole in the ceiling? Right? And for those of you who are lucky enough to live in Oslo, you probably already know the work of James Turrell at Ekeberg Park. Right? The installation is quite spectacular, actually. It's one of his best. And his whole work, and if you're not familiar with the work of Turrell, he's really one of the great living contemporary artists, and his insight is that the world that we have around us is not a world we receive, right? But it's a world that we create and make. Right? And we really feel and we're really attached to the idea that we're receiving these perceptions as opposed to creating them. But we do create the reality in which we live. I would argue we co-create it. And the body of his work is there to show you your co-creation in process. And how do you see that happening? Right? So that's maybe takeaway point number 2. Right? Not only mindless, but you're co-constructing experience. And so how that works is that, this is from Timothy Wilson in the University of Virginia, that your nervous system is thought to take in about 11 million bits of information per second. I have never fixed this typo. It should be absorbed, not observed. I don't know why. But anyway, how much of that 11 million do you think is you're consciously aware of? How much?
2 or 3 bits.
2 or 3, right? We're all really optimistic about this. Yeah, somewhere, it's very low, somewhere between 40 and 120, but tiny, tiny, tiny. It's 0.000001% of what's going on. Right? This is the smallest dot we could use to represent what you're actually conscious of. PowerPoint couldn't make a smaller dot. But, so if this is what you're conscious of, and this is everything else that's going on, right? These blind spots are influencing your perception, your choices, your actions, and the result you take all the time. And so learning how to observe this process in action, in a changing world, I think is really essential. And then let alone, how do you shift your point of view? Because as Terrell said, we're really attached to the way we see things. And asking, you asking me to see something differently could be very threatening. I grew up in a small industrial town where if you lived there for 20 years, you were still considered new. And that town was primarily employed by 2 factories, both of which are now holes in the ground, quite literally. There's nothing there. There's weeds growing out of a cement foundation. And that town, the milieu of that town was always resistant to change. And it's kind of stuck with me my entire life of seeing, here's what happens when you're resistant to change. The world changes around you. So, one of the ways I teach is primarily through questions, and usually they're not questions people like to answer. So what keeps you or your organization from perceiving more clearly? Habit, fear, pride, arrogance? Right? Because these are all restraints on perception. What are you dismissive of, afraid of, anxious about, willfully ignorant about? It was like the Japanese minister in charge of cybersecurity proudly mentioning at a press conference earlier this year that he had never owned a computer. Right? What's undiscussable? What do you actively not entertain? What's taboo to bring up? Right? And then, so you could use these questions at work. You could also use them for your marriage and see what happens. But staying in your box feels safe. Right? But who's shaping the box? Right? Who's shaping the box? And these questions are meant to help you see what are the boundaries of your fear and what are you not willing to go past. I spoke with some people at a 50-year-old think tank in Palo Alto recently, and they said, I asked them what were their challenges. And in fact, predicting the future was not one of their challenges. They're actually quite good at it. They said, the challenge is the client. And I said, what's hard about that? They said, there's 3 things that make it hard. 1, people don't have empathy for the far future. They don't, and we're talking about 2030, okay? We're not talking about the 26th century. We're talking about less than 20 years from now. They don't see how that's related to them. They obviously don't have children, I don't know. They can't see information from any other perspective other than the one they already have, right? Mindlessness locks down on their meaning making. And then the one that I love most of all is they shut down, right? They're too anxious or too frozen to face the future objectively. These are all solvable with a mindfulness
related solution, right? How do you manage the stuff that goes on inside you so that you can open up for other possibilities? One question I like to ask, and if we had a little bit more time, we would do this. Like, what have you changed your mind about recently? Right? What have you changed your mind about recently? This is one of my colleagues' favorite questions, and it helps people see that they actually have flexibility. And usually it's about what the changing their mind is about, letting go of something that that they had thought to be true before. So, takeaway, right? You're co-constructing your experience. People aren't often afraid of what are often aware of what they're doing or experiencing, i.e. mindlessness. And then without self-awareness, you'll default to some kind of habit or survival pattern, right? In the interest of time, I will skip ahead a little bit and just talk about the mindfulness in action part. So what's mindfulness anyway, right? There's many definitions of mindfulness circulating out there as there are recipes for spaghetti and meatballs, I think. But I like this particular definition. It comes from Shinzen Young because it's very clear, right? Mindfulness is 3 skills. The capacity to direct attention, right? Sensory clarity. Once your attention has landed on something, what are you experiencing? Right? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What's going on in your body? What's going on around you? Right? How do you create, the disciplined attention gives you a high-res view of what's going on inside you and around you. And then the capacity to accept what you're experiencing inside, equanimity. Right? So these 3 skills, which the reason I like this definition is that they're very modularizable in terms of teaching. Neuroscientists at Carnegie Mellon, Harvard, I think Brown, places that do that kind of stuff use this model because they can aggregate, they can separate out the skills more clearly. So the capacity to direct attention, clarity of what you're experiencing, and then your capacity to accept what you're experiencing inside, which is, according to some research done by David Cresswell at Carnegie Mellon, this is what makes it all work, right? Your capacity to accept what you're experiencing is what helps you stay clear. So, as I said, I like to teach with questions, and so if you take these 3 skills and turn them into questions, you can practice this in any time and any place, potentially, right? Where's your attention right now? Right? Like, what am I experiencing inside me right now? What are the stories in my head? What is my body feeling? What are the emotions I'm experiencing? What do I want to do? And then, what can I do to accept this inner experience? And then, right, take action. So, in dealing with my son who wanted to play with his dinosaurs and not brush his teeth, it was about noticing I felt a little bit frustrated, but I also really love my son. And then I asked myself the question, okay, what else can we do here? What does he want? What does he want? He wants to play with his dinosaurs. How can we let him play with his dinosaurs and brush his teeth? Got it, we're gonna brush the dinosaur's teeth. And it was a miracle. So, one way of thinking about what mindfulness does is that it helps you perceive and handle your co-construction process. Right? How do you manage it and how do you transform it? And so, I see the world in terms of moments, and so it looks like this, right? Like, where's my attention now? What am I experiencing now? How can I let this experience come and go? And then how does that influence the choice you make here, the action you take here, and then the result you get there? Right? So for me, being able to teach in a management school means that it almost always has to be tied to some kind of result. Not in terms of quarterly results, but like how does action turn into some kind of consequence? And by tying your actions to the consequences, managers can see the relevance of their mindfulness practice. and they all know what are the results they're getting that they don't want, and they don't like them, and they want to change them. So it gives it a really pragmatic focus, I've found, and very useful. So like, how do you apply this to your daily life? So again, this question, what consistently produces unwanted results? I work with a group of social innovators in Japan, and they're all quite remarkable human beings. They're all incredibly talented. And we started the program with the assumption that if we could help them, these really talented people, get even better, then that would do good things for society. And we started this 5 years ago, and that's largely borne out to be very true. This is the map of one of our fellows. She is she's gone on to win now several awards for her work, and quite a brilliant, visionary young woman. And she has started an arts nonprofit for immigrant children living in Tokyo who don't necessarily have the easiest time of it. Her visionary capacity is not equal to her capacity to be organized, right? So she tends to be a little messy. And her unwanted result was that she felt frustrated. She said, well, what she told me, she said, I no longer felt like a human being. Right? We're doing all this stuff, and I feel so frustrated. And I said, well, what are you frustrated about? She goes, I hate organizing. And then so we did a series of inquiries to see, like, well, how are you co-constructing this experience inside you? Right? And she said, well, because I'm the founder, I think I have to do things myself. Right? And that I can't ask for help. I mean, this is a young manager, right? Every young manager has to learn this move. And the before and after pictures were really quite telling, right? So she said, I can't figure out how to organize, it takes time and to do things. I have, I deal with ADD in my life, everything gets frustrated, I feel overwhelmed. And then she gets stuck and I feel exhausted. And then once she realized that, there were people that she could ask for help, that even though she was the founder and she was the boss, that she could rely on her team, then she looked out onto her team to say, okay, who could do this? Who could do this well, right? This is her in her fragmented life. This is her team member. These are all her team members who are actually good at organizing. Do it with others. Teamwork, I don't know how to do it, so I give it to them. I ask for help, and it took them 10 minutes to figure out what takes me 1 week. So when all the conversation about productivity and mindfulness, this is not a linear shift in productivity, right? You get these quantum leaps in productivity. Proposal writing, which is the other thing that she hated, and because she assumed she was the boss, she had to do it, and then she asked for help, and then they actually not only drafted the proposal, but they got the proposal. Right? So helping to learn how to let go of her map to open up other choices really kind of transformed her life, and you can do the same too. And it's really about just taking small steps, right? Just taking small steps and asking different kinds of questions. One question, which the simple question is like, well, what do I want here right now? Right? What's the best solution? And just putting stops in the momentum of your own mindlessness. Just doing that, I think, can be a very important and powerful thing. So, I have 5 minutes early. That's never happened ever before in my life. So, if you have questions or something like that, I'm happy to answer them. Or I can tell you, I can show more pictures of my kid. Please. Yeah.
Any more examples of that thing about slowing down to speed up? The efficiency thing that you just said, that she, it takes her a whole day, it took the team 10 minutes.
Yeah. I have a student who is she was the head of a university department in innovation at a local college. And when she started my class, she was really stuck. And she's a PhD student. Has this high-profile job. The job is incredibly toxic, and she has a 3-year-old. And when I do the intake and read, like, you know, just tell me about your life, by the time I got to the end of that, I felt really depressed. Like, I don't know if this is gonna help her or not. And then 2 weeks ago, I got this unsolicited email from her. She said, first, I said, how are things going? And she says, oh, so much has changed for me since last spring. She goes, first and biggest is I finally let go of the last 7 years, of the job that for the last 7 years has been a toxic hell. I'd been selling my soul to participate in a bullshit ladder climbing at XYZ University, and it was your class that made me realize that although I was getting pretty high on the rungs, I didn't want what was at the top. And I was sacrificing myself and my family for something I don't want. And I took an amazing position coaching teachers at a local school district. The title is lower, the accolades and constant acknowledgement are far less. And that was the hardest part for my ego to let go of. And in the words of somebody at the first day of the job, she goes, you gave all that up for this job? And my proud answer was boldly, yes. And she said, and I get paid more. I get 6 weeks off in the summer. I get a week at Thanksgiving, 2 weeks at Christmas, a week at spring break, and my workday is 8 to 3:30 and not 8 to 6. I said, wow, you moved to Norway without ever having to leave Southern California. And she said, I wouldn't have had the courage to do this and give up all the bullshit that I had worked for something I really want. I almost forgot what it was all happy to be like at work. And then she talks about her family and how her kid trusts her more, and how she's only taking 8 units in the semester, not 12 like she was before, and all of that. Anyway, so I was thinking about, okay, why does this process of just paying attention moment to moment create this result? And I think that by paying attention to, and it takes time, right? As the moments accumulate and she starts to see, like, this is an experience I don't really want to have anymore. And then she could start to see what were the beliefs and assumptions that kept her locked in that position. As they accumulated over time, a tipping point happened and she realized, I don't have to do this anymore. And then things shift. And so even though I think the moment seems inconsequential, right? You know, if we talk about the productivity of her life, you know, now she has a completely different world. So I think that's one way to think about it, right? Like how come these micro moments add up to macro shifts, I think is really important. And I would be interested to see how that works in an organizational setting. Let me think of something that comes off the top of my head about this, the comment that feelings are meant to be felt, not problems to be solved. When I work with scientists a lot, they're oftentimes quite challenging, to be frank with you. Partially because they believe they're so smart and they don't have anything to learn from anyone else. And at the same time, their emotional intelligence oftentimes isn't as high as one would want it to be.
They sound like leaders or managers, actually.
And one of my students is the head of the team that calculates the trajectory of space probes through the solar system. And so that probe that went to Pluto a few years ago, that was his team's work. And he said, and in the class we do role plays around difficult conversations. And so I said, okay, I'm going to role play the person you have to have the difficult conversation with, and you're going to sit here, okay? And I'll be him. So, I'm sitting here waiting, and he said, hey, pull up a chair and make yourself comfortable. He said, okay. And so the chair was here. And then he took the chair, and he dragged it all the way across the room like this. And then he sat down and said, okay, I'm ready. And then we're all looking at him like, what did you just do? And let's call him John. I said, John, do you notice what you just did? And he said, no. And I said, you're sitting across the room right now. And I said, John, what's going on in your body? And then he was quiet for a minute. And he said, oh my God, he goes, I want to run the hell out of this room. Right? And then that's when he got it. Right? suddenly the circuits got attached. And he said, wow, it's so hard for me to sit in this emotion, right? I was going to reorganize the entire department in order to not have this conversation, right? And so we don't think about that in terms of productivity, but obviously it is, right? And how often do we make things 100 times more complicated when if we just dealt with what you're actually experiencing, it would become totally different. But for him, then I realized, he's kind of the ultimate expression of the problem of Western civilization, right? We can put a space probe 1,000,000 miles away, tens of millions of miles away with no problem. But to deal with your anger, no way, man, that's too hard, right? And that to me is so fascinating, right? It's kind of like an idiot savant society in some way. We can do all this great stuff, right? Like I can travel the world with my iPhone, be constantly connected, but to manage emotion inside seems so challenging. So that's why I think the work you're doing here is really fantastic. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.